Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to The Truth. I'm your host, the one you love the most, Niall Hesson, back with a brand new episode here on The Truth. Back once again with my boy AJ Ponciano. AJ, how are you doing here today?
I'm doing great. How about yourself now?
I'm doing great as well. We have Thursday night action here in week 10 of the NFL. Hard to believe we're already through week 10, or we're not through it right now, but we're progressing towards being through week 10. Got through the halfway point, obviously further halfway point than fantasy football because, fantasy football ends a week before the NFL season. Typically does depend on your league settings, but we're going to give you everything you need to know for this Thursday night matchup. Actually, a pretty solid matchup, it seems like, for the first time in a while, as the Bengals and the Ravens will square off as an AFC North showdown. Today, we'll give you our starts, sits, sleepers, and busts for that contest. So, without further ado, AJ, go ahead and give me any starts that you may have.
Yeah, so I have one true start, and it's gonna be Zay Flowers. Zay these last couple weeks have really turned it on. The season off to a slow start, but since week, I want to say it's 5. Last time they played Cincinnati, in that overtime game, 7 receptions, 111 yards. Was the last time they played. Then 9 receptions, 132. Did have a bad game against Tampa. Well, only 1 reception, but then went right back to over 100 yards with 7 receptions. And then last week, 127 yards on 5 receptions and 2 touchdowns. I get it, Deontay Johnson's there, but honestly, I think that widens up the field for him even more. I mean, Zay Flowers is still going to be that number one receiving option there. Deontay Johnson has to still work up that trust with Lamar. So I think it just helps opens up the field a little bit more for Zay Flowers. And like I said, I get it was an overtime win, but the last time that they faced off against each other, 7 receptions, 111 yards. He was a big part of that game there. It's just one of the things. I think that they're going to have to keep on going back to Zay Flowers. Deontay Johnson just helps that out.
Yeah, so I'm going to have two starts actually this week. The first is going to be Mark Andrews. I feel like in a couple years ago, Mark Andrews would have consistently been a must start option. I think he classifies as a must start. Obviously, we know a lot of obvious must starts, like probably Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, but Mark Andrews used to be in that category. He hasn't been really this year. He has kind of picked it up as of late, although he did have a little bit of a quiet week last week, 2 catches for 26 yards. The 3 weeks before that, 3 for 66 and a touchdown for 15.6. 4 for 41 and 2 touchdowns at 20.1, and then 5 for 36 and a touchdown at 14.6. I think he gets back up to that. Obviously, Zay Flowers really took the reins last week for the Lamar Jackson passing attack and was able to have tremendous amount of success. But this is a home divisional game against Cincinnati, the second of their 2 games at home. So I think they are going to have a heavy focus. And what do I always say about Thursday night games? There's a lot of attention and a lot of targets to tight ends. I think Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely could have a lot of targets. And although people may be scared because of Isaiah Likely in the last Thursday night game against Kansas City to open up the season, I definitely think this is a opportunity for the Ravens to get Mark Andrews back in action, and consistently get back into the touchdown because he is a touchdown threat. He's a red zone threat. And I believe he's 2 years younger than George Kittle, which is kind of hard to believe because I feel like Mark Andrews has been in the league for a period of time, which he has been. But I think there's still some life in those legs, especially in this matchup here against Cincinnati. Secondly, I'm going to go with Chase Brown. Now, obviously, I think Chase Brown's an obvious must start. There was a debate that you could start Chase Brown pretty much every week, but now, especially since Zach Moss is on IR, Chase Brown had a tremendous game last week. 27 carries for 120 yards, 5 catches for 37 yards and a touchdown to equate to 26.7 points. But the big thing that stuck out to me was 27 carries, had a total of 32 touches on the day. This is a guy that obviously was not drafted very high. I was very high on him going into the draft, for a variety of reasons, just because I thought Chase Brown was a very elite talent. He's in the Bengals offense where we obviously saw the passing attack that the Bengals offense had with Joe Mixon. I think Chase Brown is very similar to that matter. On top of that, being the only back, or the main back, I should say, should really appetize fantasy owners once again. He is rostered somehow in only 84.3% of leagues, and I understand people may be a little bit skeptical, but since Zach Moss is on IR, you definitely have to pounce at this as much as possible. And the 26.7 points was honestly not by far his best game. His other best game was 15 for 82 touchdowns at Carolina. Going on the road again in Baltimore, I could see similar success where he gets at least 20 plus points, especially if Joe Burrow and that offense really pick things up and really continue to progress moving forward. All right, any sits?
Actually, the guy you just talked about, Chase Brown, and I think his opportunities are there. Obviously, he said, basically almost 30 carries there, his first 100-yard rushing game of the season. But he's going up against the best ran defense in the NFL right now against, with the Ravens. The Ravens have a lot of the 30 fewest yards at 681. The Vikings are at first at 655. So very tight gap there. But one of the big things is only 3.4 yards per carry, which is the lowest in the NFL. And I just don't expect them to go back and forth like that, where they're or for the Bengals having to be on the ground. Now Chase is a good receiving threat, so that will help out his fantasy value. But if you look at the last time they played, he did have 12 rush attempts, 46 yards there, 3 receptions for 8 yards. He did have one receiving touchdown. So like I said, the receiving side is there, but I don't expect him to have 27 carries like that. I think close to that 15 to 18 range is very doable, especially against this really good defense. I mean, last week they were playing the Raiders. The Raiders suck. They were up by a lot. They won 41-27. So this made sense that running the ball, chewing up clock made sense. That's why he got a lot of those carries there. I said, more realistically, I think on the high end, he'll probably get 20, 21 carries on the very high end. I think he'll probably sit somewhere, like I said, set 15 to 18 carries there, probably 2, 3 receptions out of the backfield. He may get a touchdown. So very good like flex play there for a lot of teams. I know for myself, I'm very stacked at the running back position in the one league that I have with him. So I will not be starting him. But if I was a little bit weaker there, he would definitely be like an RB2 start for me potentially, or more of a flex option.
So I have two sets this week. The first is going to be Deontay Johnson, recently acquired from the Carolina Panthers. Kind of a funny note. So the Panthers played at Denver, and then he was traded, and the Ravens played against Denver, home and away there, and he didn't get a single catch in either of the games. I believe he wasn't even playing in that first game with Carolina at Denver, and then he didn't get a single touch in the game against Denver. I believe he played 16 of the snaps. I think there's some hype surrounding Deontay Johnson, but I think a lot of the hype surrounding Deontay Johnson really stemmed from his opportunities in Carolina. Obviously, a quarterback carousel there with Andy Dalton and Bryce Young. Guys like Xavier Legette have obviously stepped up to the plate. Adam Thielen's been on IR. I think the veteran presence of Deontay Johnson was very appetizing to some fantasy owners, especially if they hung in after the first 2 weeks, because week 3 and 4, 26.2 and 21.3. Then had another good week against Atlanta, 6 for 78 and 1 touchdown. But all in all, I mean, this is a different team. This is a different Deontay Johnson, not necessarily as a player, but the style that he's going to be in. He now joins an elite offense with probably the MVP favorite right now, and Lamar Jackson. He's got Zay Flowers, who's competing for targets, who also is competing for yards and touchdowns. You got two reliable tight end options in Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. And you're not even mentioning guys like Rashad Bateman, who've had some time with the Ravens for a period of time now. I think it's a lose-lose situation for Deontay Johnson, especially in this matchup here against Cincinnati. I really wouldn't feel comfortable starting Deontay Johnson until at least I see a good amount of stats from him, and at least in 1 week where I'm seeing 15 fantasy points and I'm really seeing 5, 6 receptions, because then I know he's the guy that Lamar is going to look to on a consistent basis. On top of that, I always feel like it's spotty being a Ravens fantasy owner other than Lamar Jackson, because it seems like Lamar Jackson has his games where he'll throw to Zay Flowers and Zay Flowers will get 30 fantasy points. And then you'll have games where Zay Flowers gets 2. And it's all positions. It's Isaiah Likely, it's Mark Andrews, it's Zay Flowers, it's everybody. It's even Derrick Henry. It doesn't make any sense to me. It was like a Lamar Jackson effect. Anyways, the biggest thing here is I really need to see some more from Deontay Johnson. Obviously, I need to see him get at least a catch, but maybe 4 or 5 to be a consistent start option, especially for the fact that he is rostered in 86.8% of leagues. And secondly, this one's going to pay me a little bit, but I'm going to go Joe Burrow. I know I was talking earlier that a lot of people would consider Joe Burrow to be a start. And I do believe that if you have Joe Burrow as your starting quarterback, I think he could definitely be a start. The biggest thing that concerns me is the fact that they're going on the road here in Baltimore. Very difficult place to play. I think the Bengals offense could stagnate a little bit. I think Joe Burrow could stagnate a little bit, especially after the game that he had last week. 27 for 39, 251, 5 touchdowns, and 1 interception for 29 fantasy points. He had games of 33, 19, 14, 12, and then 29. So it's really kind of hit or miss the way that Joe Burrow's been playing. And typically when he had a good game like he did against Baltimore the last time they played, he had 33 fantasy points. The next week had a 14-point drop off to 19. I think it's only fitting the fact that he's going to go down. There obviously is potential that he can go up. But the only way that he can go up is if he gets the 300 plus yards with the probably 6 touchdowns or 5 touchdowns, no interceptions, or some type of rushing value. And that's just not the Joe Burrow that we know. So I think, the biggest thing with this is obviously the game that he had last week is where I feel like I'm a little bit cause for concern just in the grand scheme of things. But on top of that, after 2 games at home, going on the road on a Thursday night matchup in Baltimore with one of the more complex teams, I feel like at times, I definitely think is a sign that I would definitely shy away from as much as possible. Only if there was the option to, I should point out. He is a very good quarterback as a whole. All right, what about any sleepers?
Actually, I really like Deontay Johnson. Last week against Denver, he didn't play at all. That's why you see 0 targets, 0 receptions, 0 yards there. He was one of those. He was coming when he got traded over. It was one of those things that he was already kind of dealing with an injury, so they just didn't rush him to. They didn't rush him into the game there, especially against Denver, where a game that they were assuming that they were going to win. But like I said, I think Deontay Johnson will take away uh, targets from Zay Flowers. Like I said, Zay Flowers is a must start because he's already proven. But Deontay Johnson, if you got a team on bye and you have their wide receiver one there, I wouldn't mind Deontay Johnson throwing him as your wide receiver two or potentially a flex play. I mean, we've seen what he's able to do when he's had a good quarterback. When Andy Dalton or a quarterback that is able to push the ball down the field that isn't Bryce Young. I mean, we saw originally with the Steelers with Big Ben how well he was able to play. Andy Dalton, who's able to push the ball down the field and be a little bit more of a competent quarterback at times. You saw him have success there. I could see him having success with Lamar. I don't think he's going to have the huge plays because it's not really how his pass offense is built. I know last week, was last week Lamar's 5 touchdown game or 2 weeks ago, wherever which one it was. He was able to really push the ball down the field. I don't think that's going to be Deontay Johnson's role. I think that's going to be more Zay Flowers. I think Deontay Johnson will be more of a slot guy and be one of those guys that you can see getting 5-6 receptions every single week just because he's available right there. So, like I said, this is going to be his first game. I think they're going to want to try to give him the ball. One of the things you've seen with these wide receivers I've gotten traded over before the trade deadline, they got him involved early. Mari Cooper, D Hop, all those guys. They got him involved early on. They all so far they've all had touchdowns from what I can remember. I know D Hop did, and Amari Cooper had a touchdown as well. So potentially Deontay Johnson could be right there with them. And second of all, I'm gonna go with T Higgins. I know he's doubtful to play, but I would just wait last minute before you go and just leave him on your bench. Last time they played was in that overtime game. 14 targets, which was a season high. 9 receptions, a season high. 83 yards, a season high, and also had 2 touchdowns there. Granted, he has been injured most of the year. I think one of the things I really like to see though, if you take away the first game that he played against Washington, where he only had 3 receptions for 39 yards, he went 6 receptions, 60 yards. That game against Baltimore that I just mentioned, 7 receptions for 77 yards, 4 receptions for 82 yards and a touchdown. He's been good. He's given you over 10 fantasy points every time that he's been healthy, outside of that very first start of the year. Again, he just hasn't been healthy. I'd wait very last minute and just see what the decision is for T. Higgins. But he was good last time, and we saw how much attention Jamar Chase takes up against his offenses. And if he's healthy, he's that number two option that he will get targets.
So I only have one sleeper, and it was originally Isaiah Likely, and then I completely forgot the fact that he's already been ruled out for the Thursday night game, I believe with a lower body injury, which is another reason why I think you should start Mark Andrews. What I was trying to emphasize earlier was the fact that with Lamar Andrews, Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, when those two are together, obviously last Thursday night in Week 1 against Kansas City, we obviously saw where that target share went to. Bottom line is Lamar loves to throw to his tight ends. I think Mark Andrews could have an increased role, especially with Likely out. Who also I think will have an increased role is Rashad Bateman. Now, Rashad Bateman's doing better than overall I'll give him credit for. He had 3 really good weeks, 2 rough weeks, but he had a good week against Tampa Bay, 4 catches, 121 and 1 touchdown back in Week 7, 15, 11 points 2 weeks before that. All in all, he's really high risk, high reward. He's a guy that could win you a week, but he's also a guy that can lose you a league. And I'm really looking at leagues that are 14, 16 teamer, guys that have a lot of options to throw to, or guys that have a lot of maybe question marks on their team. Rashad Bateman could be a plug and play guy. He's also kind of had a good week, 2 bad weeks, and a good week. And if that trend continues, you have a good week, 2 bad weeks, which are the last 2 weeks, and a good week against Cincinnati. I think especially Rashad Bateman is a sleeper just on the fact that Isaiah Likely is out. Again, I probably am not starting Rashad Bateman unless it's a 14 or 16 team league, and that's if there's injuries, buys, or things like that. But he's definitely a guy that could win you a week based on the fact of his ability to get up to 22, 23 points, and he's rostered in about 9% of leagues. Any bus?
I'm gonna go with Mike Gesicki. I just don't trust it. He's been hot the last 2 weeks. 7 receptions, 73 yards, and then last week, 5 receptions, 100 yards, and 2 touchdowns. But if you look at the last game they played, 2 receptions, only 31 yards. He only had 2 targets in that game as well. There's not a lot of targets there. Yeah, that could also be because of T. Higgins not playing these past couple weeks. Why Gesicki's numbers have been up. But I just don't trust it. I don't trust him from the tight end position being able to have that type of production. He's only had 3 weeks where he would have been a solid fantasy option for you. Back when they played in Kansas City, 7 for 91, and then like I said, the last 2 weeks. If you take away just last week's game with those 2 touchdowns, you take away all the touchdowns that he's had all season, and that was 100 yards. You'd only have 253 yards. He has 353 yards with last week's game. If you take that away, you take away essentially a third or a little bit less than a third of his total yards. I mean, he just hasn't been consistent enough. I get it; he's on the field a good amount. I believe Eric All is out for the year, so that could also help him. There being basically the only tight end on that roster, but yeah, if T. Higgins is there, we've seen it with Gesicki. His numbers completely start fading, but then he also could take a step forward because he is really the only tight end or roster tight end right now. So I just don't really like the numbers for him. Plus the linebackers there and safeties there for the Ravens are really good. Kyle Hamilton will probably be on him a lot of game. Roquan Smith, who's a good coverage linebacker, will be on him probably a good amount of the game. I just don't trust Gesicki. I think that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I don't trust Gesicki. I mean, I don't trust his gritty. He might have the worst gritty in the entire NFL, but I don't trust him as
Or
a
Daniel
player. I mean, I
Jones.
think his well,
Daniel
I
Jones is
mean,
pretty
Mike
bad.
Gesicki
Mac
was the
Jones. Mac Jones
first.
Pro Bowl.
I
Mac
was
Jones Pro
yeah,
Bowl is
but
pretty bad.
I think the first bad gritty I remember was Mike Gesicki. I could be wrong on that, okay, and that could change, but I think Mike
Kirkos
Gesicki
wasn't that
was
good either. I think if I remember, Kirko was
Kirko.
trying to
No,
break one up.
Kirko. Captain Kirk was not very good. Okay, I will admit, but so obviously he's got an L in that category, but. Also, I think his numbers are a bit misleading. Okay, Eric All, as you mentioned, out for the year last week. Well, sorry, out for the year now because of last week, tore his ACL. But that's also partly why Gesicki kind of had a good game, 5 catches, 100 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He's not going to repeat that. The week before was some optimism, 7 catches for 73 yards. But Gesicki, I just don't think you can trust him. I think a lot of people are going to be jumping to the gun and using Mike Gesicki. He was rostered in 19.5 of fantasy leagues, putting that up to 30% this week. I think a lot of people are going to be disappointed, especially if they're starting him going up against a team like Baltimore. And I understand they like to throw. I mean, I always say this, and I'd be not going back on my word, but they do typically throw to tight ends on Thursday night games. I think also why I'm kind of fading Gesicki is I'm fading Burrow. So Burrow is going to be limited with options. The only way I could see him maybe getting through is if T. Higgins is out. He is doubtful, which is not a good sign, but we've seen guys rise from the dead from doubtful and have great games. And we've also seen guys that were supposed to go and they didn't go at Christian McCaffrey. So there's just, you never really know. That's, as you mentioned, like it's a last second decision, right? But regardless, if Higgins is on the field, I think Gesicki's production's down. I think his production's down as a whole. But I think if T. Higgins is gone, then Gesicki may have production. But I'm still avoiding it as much as possible. I need to see more consistency because they didn't really throw the ball to tight ends a lot to begin with. What about a game prediction?
I think this one not be an overtime game like how it was the last time they played.
That would be fun.
I think that would be fun. I just don't think it's going to happen, especially if T. Higgins does end up not playing and the addition of Deontay Johnson. I have the Ravens winning. I think that would be 24-20. I think it will come down to. I think Lamar will probably have like a game-winning drive. I think I always predict like a game-winning drive out of someone, but this kind of seems like one of those games, divisional games. That division's always super tough. They always play really hard against each other. I mean, you always remember the games like the Steelers games there against the Bengals where the whole Juju Smith-Schuster knocking out I forgot which linebacker, and then the hit on AB and all that. That looked like that's where he got the CTE, where it originated from. So this division is super tough. It's really hard to beat a team twice, but I think Ravens are right now one of my MVP favorite or. Well, not MVP favorites, Super Bowl favorites right now. So I have them keep going, and I think with this win, that'll almost secure them the division.
I'm gonna go with the Ravens as well, 28-13. I know it always never seems to be more than a one score game, but I'm gonna go ahead and say it is. I think the Bengals do struggle a little bit, especially coming off some momentum from a big win against the Raiders. But the Ravens are just too good. They're at home. They got the MVP front runner. They got probably a really caliber Super Bowl ready team that's ready to just kind of break through and break past the Chiefs and make a run. So should be a good game regardless. Because I'm predicting a 2-score game, it probably will end up being a 1-score last second overtime type game. But should be a fun AFC North battle to say the least. Thank you guys for listening to another episode here in The Truth. If you guys did enjoy it, make sure you follow The Truth on Twitter at The Truth as one to stay up to date with the latest information regarding The Truth, including podcast dates, podcast uploads, and other important information you don't want to miss. Make sure you guys also follow The Truth on Instagram and TikTok at the.tt.truth. Are you looking to find a drink that offers peak hydration, raises your energy levels, speeds up your recovery, and keeps your mind sharp through focused memory? Look no further than Acid Rainwater. I'm excited to partner with Bloodline Sports AZ and Acid Rainwater, which focuses on peak hydration and productivity, while also maintaining an ecosystem-friendly product. Use code HESSON15, that's HESSON15 for 15% off every purchase. As always, I'm your host, the one you love the most, Niall Hesson, joined once again by AJ Ponciano. Take care and good night.